All right, let's uncork a piece of history, shall we? You've probably heard this one before. In the Middle Ages, everyone was constantly drinking beer and wine because the water would kill you. It's a great story, but is it the whole story? Not even close. Today, we're going to find out what was really filling the cups of medieval people.
So let's just get this one out of the way right now. This whole idea that water was basically a death sentence, it's a huge myth. It's easy to picture these filthy rivers and think, one sip and you've got dysentery. And yeah, sure, if you were in a big city like London, drinking straight from the River Thames could be a very bad idea. But people weren't stupid. They knew the difference between clean water and dirty water. They definitely didn't think of it as poison.
So here's the thing. The choice between booze and water wasn't that simple. Out in the countryside, where most people lived, you had clean springs, wells, and streams everywhere. Even in the cities, a good well was way safer than the river. The real reason people preferred alcoholic drinks came down to a few things. They were packed with calories, they stayed fresh a lot longer, and honestly, they were a status symbol. For your average farmer, clean water was just normal. For the rich, though, water was for washing, not for drinking, when you had much better and much more impressive options on the table.
So, here's what we've got on tap today. We're going to dig into why alcohol was king, take a deep dive into the world of beer and ale, check out the fancy wines of the elite, and even look at what else they were fermenting. Then, we'll stop by the local tavern to see how it was the center of everything, and finally, we'll look at the hangovers and the new drinks that started to change the game.
Okay, so why was alcohol the go-to drink for so many people? Well, it really boils down to three big reasons. First, nutrition. Beer was literally called liquid bread. It was thick, it was cloudy, and it was full of carbs and vitamins. If you were a laborer burning thousands of calories a day, this was your fuel. Second, it was just safer. The brewing process boiled the water, which killed off most of the nasty bacteria, and the alcohol itself helped preserve it. They didn't know about germs, of course, but they knew from experience that ale was a much better bet than the town pump. And third, doctors actually recommended it. Based on old Greek ideas, they thought wine was hot and dry and great for digestion, while water was cold and moist and just kind of unhealthy. Now, let's talk about the undisputed champion of drinks, at least in Northern Europe, beer and its cousin ale. For most folks in places like England, Germany, and Scandinavia, this stuff wasn't a luxury. Oh no, it was an absolute daily essential for men, women, and even children. And when I say daily essential, I am not kidding. How much are we talking about? Well, records from places like England suggest the average person drank around 300 liters of ale every single year. That's nearly 80 gallons. This wasn't about getting drunk. It was about staying alive and getting your calories. Think about it. That's almost a full liter every day for every single person. It was their sports drink, their meal supplement, and their safe drinking water all rolled into one. And this just goes to show you how central it was. Even in monasteries, the most disciplined communities around, a monk's daily ration was often a full gallon of beer. It was their fuel, they'd drink it all day long to stay hydrated and get the calories they needed for a crazy schedule of hard labor, study, and prayer that started way before the sun came up. Okay, this probably brings up a big question. With all that drinking, weren't people just constantly drunk? And the answer is a big, fat no. The reason is that most of the stuff they drank all day was what they called small beer. It had a really low alcohol content, like maybe 1 to 3%, weaker than most of our modern light beers. It was hydrating, it was nutritious, it was safe. The strong stuff, the ale that's more like what we drink today, that was saved for the evening, for special occasions, or for when you were having a drink with friends. So who was making all this ale? For a long time, brewing was mostly women's work. They were called alley wives or brewsters. They'd brew for their own families and sell whatever was left over to the neighbors for a little extra cash. But as brewing got more profitable, men and their guilds started pushing the women out. Now here's where it gets really fascinating. Picture the classic image of a witch, a woman in a tall, pointy hat so she could be seen in a crowded market, a broomstick or an ale stake propped outside her door to show a new batch was ready, a big bubbling cauldron, and maybe a cat to keep mice out of the grain. Suddenly, all those witch stereotypes start to look a whole lot like the tools of a medieval alley wife's trade.
And you know what's really cool? The importance of these women brewers is baked right into the English language. Ever wonder where the word bridal comes from? It's from bride ale. This was a tradition where a woman about to be married would brew a huge batch of special ale and sell it to the whole community. The money she made went toward her dowry or to pay for the wedding feast. It was part fundraiser, part small business, and part giant pre-wedding party.
Now, I've been using ale and beer kind of interchangeably, but back then there was a huge difference. Ale was the original stuff, flavored with a secret mix of herbs and spices called grüt. The problem was it went bad really fast, sometimes in just a few days. Beer, on the other hand, was brewed with hops, which turned out to be an amazing natural preservative. And we can give a big thank you to a brilliant 12th century German abbess, Hildegard von Bingen. She was the one who wrote about how great hops were for stopping putrefaction. This discovery totally changed the game, letting beer last for months and travel long distances.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time with the common folk. Let's climb the social ladder and talk about wine. Down in Southern Europe, where grapes grew everywhere, wine was pretty common for everybody. But up north, it was an expensive import, and that made it a powerful symbol of wealth and status, something for the nobles and the top church officials.
But yeah, not all wine was created equal, not even close. The really good stuff, the rich, expensive wine from the very first pressing of the grapes, that was only for the upper crust. As this quote says, regular people got the leftovers, cheap wine made from the second or even third pressing of the grape skins. And if you were really poor, your wine might just be a gnarly drink made from soaking those leftovers in water, or maybe just some watered-down vinegar.
Meanwhile, on the total opposite end of the spectrum, the wealthy were drinking something called hippocras. This was red wine packed with an insane amount of super expensive imported spices and sweetened with sugar, which was a crazy luxury itself. And this wasn't just about showing off. Doctors thought the hot spices actually helped your body digest the wine better. So drinking hippocras was like showing everyone how rich you were, taking your medicine, and having a wild flavor experience all in one sip.
And believe me, they took their wine quality very seriously. I mean, without modern preservatives, wine went bad all the time. But if a winemaker got caught selling spoiled wine, the punishment was brutal and public. In some towns, they'd make him drink a ton of his own terrible wine, and then they'd pour the rest of the barrel over his head in the town square for everyone to see. It was a pretty clear message. You make it, you drink it.
But it wasn't all just beer and wine, of course. Medieval people were super resourceful. They fermented pretty much anything they could get their hands on, which led to a whole bunch of other cool drinks that were tied to what was available locally.
Let's talk about mead. You know, the famous honey wine of the Vikings. It's one of the oldest alcoholic drinks in the world, and it came in a lot of different flavors. As you can see here, you had your basic mead, but then you had metheglin, which was spiced up, you had melomel, which had fruit in it, and even piment, which was like a mix of mead and grape wine. And here's a great little fact for you. The word honeymoon, it's believed to come from the tradition of giving newlyweds a month's supply of mead to, encourage fertility and good fortune.
And the fermenting fun didn't stop there. In places with lots of apple orchards, like Normandy and Western England, cider was huge. You also had perry, which is made from pears. People made a strong drink called prunellelle from wild plums. And for just a little while every spring, people in colder climates would tap birch trees and drink the fresh sap. It wasn't alcoholic, just a slightly sweet natural tonic to get some nutrients after a long winter.
So we've covered what they drank, which is super interesting. But how and where they drank, that's maybe even more important. Drinking was almost always something you did with other people. It was the social glue of the time, and the tavern or alehouse was the absolute heart of public life.
So think about this for a second. In a world with no newspapers, no social media, no way to get information out to lots of people quickly, what was the medieval internet? Where did you go to get the latest news, hear what the king was up to, make a business deal, or just get all the local gossip?
The answer? You went to the tavern. Seriously, these places were so much more than just bars. This was where news from travelers spread from one town to the next. It's where merchants made deals and where craft guilds held their meetings. You could negotiate your daughter's marriage, settle a fight with your neighbor, or just relax after a hard day's work. The tavern wasn't just in the community, it was the community hub.
Drinking was so baked into the culture that it was literally part of the legal system. This practice of ale-allowings was basically sealing a deal by having a drink. In a time when most people couldn't read or write, sharing a drink in public was like a binding contract that the whole community witnessed. You could even settle a legal dispute where a judge would order you to publicly apologize and then buy the other person a drink to show that everything was settled. It was business, law, and socializing all mixed together.
Okay, so in a world this soaked in alcohol, from the weak beer in the morning to the strong stuff at night, you know what's coming next, right? The inevitable hangover. So let's look at how they dealt with the morning after and what new drinks started to show up on the horizon. So what did you do for that pounding headache? Well, they had some interesting ideas. Some of them actually worked. Willow bark tea has salicin in it, which is the key ingredient in aspirin. And yep, the hair of the dog was already a thing. But then you get the weirder stuff like eating raw eel mixed with bitter almonds. Yikes. And if all else failed, you could always try rubbing an egg yolk on your forehead while praying to Saint Bibiana, and yes, she is the official patron saint of hangovers.
But, nothing lasts forever. The drinking world of the Middle Ages was already starting to change in some really big ways. Distillation technology showed up from the Arab world, giving them hard liquors called aqua vitae, or water of life, which they first used as medicine. We already saw how hops revolutionized beer. By 1494, you see the first license to make whiskey in Scotland. But the biggest culture shock was still to come, with the arrival of coffee and tea, hot, boiled, safe, non-alcoholic drinks that gave people a whole new reason to get together.
And that leaves us with a fun final thought to chew on. In the 1600s, coffee houses started popping up, and they became the new social hotspots, buzzing with energy from caffeine instead of alcohol. They were places for business, for politics, for brilliant ideas. They were even called penny universities, because for the price of a coffee, you could listen in on the smartest people around. So if the tavern was the medieval internet, what does that make the coffee shop? Maybe it was the first big system update.